hosted each month by three members, Congressman Jim Jordan, Congress Labrador, and Congressman Huelskamp, and they always invite others to join them to take your questions of the day. This is a very good turnout. We're delighted to see everyone here. So we're going to hop right into it. For those of you who are tweeting, I would just suggest that if you want to be part of that conversation, use hashtag CWC114. All right, we're going to get started. I'm going to open up the questioning here. I think one of the main topics that people are going to be interested in is what you all learned last night when you talked to those running for the next Speaker of the House. So let me toss that open to anyone here. The floor, Congressman Labrador, why don't I start with you? How was it received? What were your impressions and your takeaways?
It was very well received. I think every person who came to speak with us had some good things to say, but we also realized that we're talking to politicians who are going to make a lot of promises in the middle of a campaign. So we want to make sure that it's not just a promise, but we want to see a course of action. And we want to see what exactly they're going to do to change what's happening here in the House, to change the way we're doing things in the House. We're being blamed as conservatives for what happened over the last couple of weeks, but we are just reflecting the frustration that See, that's leadership right now. They don't want me to tell my message. The difference is that we were willing to stand up for the principles that we all campaigned on. You know, it's not like we moved the ball and we said we want different things. These are the things that we have been campaigning on. This is why we have a Republican majority. And I think every candidate last night told us some good things. We're going to listen to them today as well. There's a forum right now at the RSC that many of our members are there. I'm going to go to that forum after this and listen to the three candidates. We have not made a decision on who we're going to support. We're going to meet later on this afternoon, at least the House Freedom Caucus will, and we will make a decision. Hopefully we can have a unified front and move forward, because we cannot change this place if we just continue business as usual.
Yeah, I would just to quickly follow up on Raul's, it was a good meeting last night, and our group has every intention of voting together tomorrow and on the House floor, and we're going to have further discussions.
Anyone else like to make a comment before I open it up to the floor here?
I will say they all talked about process change, which is part of the narrative that's sort of gotten lost in this, I think. The narrative is that the right-wing ideologues forced the Speaker to step down because he didn't have the right ideology. The reality is this institution has been run poorly, and the entire conference recognizes that, and at least all three candidates recognize that. Now, to what degree they're sincere in terms of reforming that, it remains to be seen, but I found that to be encouraging. You know, we want time to read the bills. We don't want kicked off our committees for voting a certain way. Our fundraising shouldn't be canceled just because of one vote. And those are the sort of institutional changes I think need to happen. And I heard that last night.
I don't want to jump in here, but I think one thing that's important for the next leadership team to realize, whoever they are, is that we have to come up with some way to deal with the Senate filibuster, which has become sort of a permanent stalemate in this republic. Because even those that would suggest that somehow minority, conservative, I don't know who they'd be talking about, but the conservatives in the House are putting undue leverage on the system. The truth is, this House has performed fairly well. We passed, Obamacare repeal. We passed defunding Planned Parenthood. Almost everything that our bases wanted us to do, we've done. But they go over to the Senate and they go nowhere. And there's no mechanism to hold anyone accountable there, because this filibuster is sort of subterranean. And so consequently, that's what's created the division here. I'm convinced if it hadn't been for the filibuster in the Senate, we probably would not be in a big leadership debate right now. Because what happens is when we get stymied in the Senate, say the DHS bill, it goes over to the Senate. We have fully funded the department. But the Senate Democrats say, no, you guys are shutting the government down. We're not going to vote on it. And so consequently, it comes back here, and our leadership makes a very difficult decision. They say, okay, do we shut the government down long term, which is what the Democrats want us to do, or do we do something else, which people like me then vote against? It's a very difficult situation, and we have to do one of two things, and I'm through. We either have to change or somehow alter the Senate filibuster rule, or raise the practice of how the Democrats are abusing it to such a high profile politically that it becomes untenable for them to continue to do this insidious stalemate of this republic. If we want to do anything as a movement, as conservatives, we have to deal with that, unless we think that we're going to be in a supermajority for the foreseeable future, and we're going to have 60 senators, which is what you need, 60 senators, if there's only 60 of them on the floor, to do anything of consequence, to debate, to vote, to do anything.
But I want to address it. I don't disagree with anything Trent Frank said, not a single thing. But our leadership can change the dynamic and the culture of this place, of Congress. If they tell the Senate, you guys can use your rules, you can filibuster, do all the things you want, but we're only going to send you one bill. You guys pass whatever you want to pass in the Senate, and then we'll go to conference. Just that one monumental change from our leadership. That doesn't require the Senate to have buy-in. Our leadership just needs to say, this is our bill. We're going to send it to you 7 weeks before the deadline, not 7 minutes before the deadline. And you guys do whatever you can for the next couple of weeks and send us something back. If we like it, we will approve it. If we don't like it, we're going to go to conference, and we're going to have 4 weeks to be in conference before a deadline. What's happening right now is that our leadership has jammed us again and again by bringing forth legislation the night before, 2 days before a deadline. And then it's a do or die moment that allows the media then to have the countdown clock and all those different things. We don't need those things if we're acting 6, 7, 8 weeks before the deadline. And that's something that we can do internally without any help from the Senate. And the first time it happens, if the Senate wants to wait till the last minute, then that's their problem. They need to take care of their own rules. I wish they would undo the filibuster, but I can't force them to do that. But I can ask my leadership to represent us so we can stand up for the House instead of always waiting to be jammed by the Senate.
Let me say this. There's one central theme in all of this when we talk about leadership races, and that is members feeling empowered. Because you see, if a member is disempowered or doesn't feel like he or she has the power necessary to have a voice here, then that disempowers the district as well. That's 700 or so thousand people in their district that don't have the power as well in representation. So whether it's the process or whether it's the person who's in charge here as speaker, the important thing is, how do we restore that power to the individual members so they have a voice in the bills and the shape of government and policy coming out of Washington? Because you've heard examples here of how we get jammed at the last minute, how we're given binary choices, when in fact there's a lot of smart people up here who, if they had the proper input early enough, could really make a huge difference in a very positive way and get much better ratings from people out there who are very dissatisfied with Congress right now.
All right, well, let's open it up to the floor, and I would just ask that you please wait if you just raise your hand. We'll bring a microphone to you. Please just state your name and your affiliation. And if we can stick to the speaker race right now, and then we can open up to other questions if you have them. But first off, let's start with anybody who has a question related to the speaker race. We'll start here on the front with John. Wait for the mic.
My question to anyone in the group is twofold. Two of your colleagues told me yesterday that Majority Leader McCarthy has not lost a single vote because of his unfortunate statement, although many people will use that as an excuse. I just wonder if you could comment on that. And also, and this is related to it, studying the last time that a race for Speaker on the full House floor went beyond one ballot. That was 1923, and it went 9 ballots because 22 Republicans insisted on a change in process to empower more the committees and others. How many of you would be willing to vote for a candidate other than that of the conference choice in order to get the process change as your predecessors did in 1923 successfully?
As I said earlier, we have every intention of voting together tomorrow and on the House floor. We are going to meet, but that's our intention.
John, those are great questions as well. Let me answer the first one, though, about Benghazi. And clearly, Kevin gained no votes by that statement inside the Beltway. But I just came out of a meeting with conservative groups representing millions across America. I mean, they are aghast at a statement like that. That has real-world implications, electoral implications as well, and they thought it was a major gaffe. And I will say on this issue, and on the issue of John Boehner currently as Speaker, I mean, there is an incredible disconnect. When 60% of Republicans think the Washington establishment Republicans have betrayed them, there's an enormous disconnect. So, yeah, I can understand where folks up here say it doesn't matter, but out in the real world of activists, I mean, they're aghast at such a statement. And I didn't say much earlier, but I was also, my take on last night was there's not much to talk about because there's nothing you can take to the bank. But I think folks are starting to realize there's not 218 for Mr. McCarthy or anybody else today. We have a long ways to go. Luckily, we have 3 weeks to look at this. This is a major decision. Whoever gets this spot is second in line to be president of the United States. It's not necessarily about campaign contribution, those kind of things. So we will take our time. We're not going to be rushing to it. House Freedom Caucus is going to talk. House Tea Party Caucus, we're going to talk internally and talk with outside groups. But outside groups, conservative groups, they're not comfortable at all with picking Boehner's right-hand man to take the speaker slot as of today.
Right.
Well, those are two really good questions. On the gaffe, I want to say something that's really important. I think it was a mistake. I think if you ask Kevin McCarthy today, he realizes it was a mistake. There's clearly no question that it was inarticulate. But let's not forget who politicized this issue first. It was Hillary Clinton. We would not have a Benghazi committee today if a few months before the election, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama had not decided to give a false narrative about what happened in Benghazi. We wouldn't have a Benghazi committee today if Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama had not decided to not give us all the information. So as you're reporting on this, let's not forget that the only reason we need a Benghazi committee is because of the falsehoods that came out of this administration just before a presidential election because they didn't want to look bad. So let's just be clear that there's no question that what Kevin said was inartful and was wrong, and he has apologized. I think it does put into question whether he's going to continue. One gaffe does not make me not want to vote for somebody, but if this is a pattern of behavior, then you have to really consider whether that person is prepared for that such a high office. And I know some of the people here have written that there's been a pattern.
If I could add to what Royal just said, I know you would agree with me, though, and we would all agree that we just want the committee to get to the bottom of it and get to the facts, whatever they are, no matter what they are. I mean, maybe someone has suspicions that this happened or that happened, but we really owe it to the people who died to just get to the bottom. And I know you agree with me on that, and I know Representative McCarthy agrees with that. That's really what caused the whole thing to start in the beginning, and that's what we're really after.
And thank you. I agree with you 100%, and that's why we're here, because we didn't get all the facts in the beginning.
Chad Pergram from Fox News. A couple of you talked about, this is such a big decision here. And you talked about how, okay, you want to see if this next person doesn't make some of the same mistakes. How can you have those guarantees? Mr. Labrador, you talked about saying, these are all politicians, they're running for positions here. Are we going to start quoting The Who here in a minute? But how do you get to that at this point? And regardless of who comes out of the leadership race tomorrow, that somehow doesn't calcify between now and when the floor vote takes place in late October.
You get some changes in the way things work around here before the vote too. That's what we're hoping to do. I always say that you're much more likely to get some changes in how things operate in this place while people are trying to get votes than when they've already got them. So we're working on that. We're talking about those things, and we've presented each of the three candidates some changes we think make sense regarding how the conference works and how the rules on the floor work. So we'll be continuing those conversations.
Whoever wins tomorrow has 3 weeks to make those changes. I mean, it's a godsend for them that they don't have to change them tomorrow. They're making the promises today, but they actually have 3 weeks to make the changes and present them to the conference before we even vote on the floor. So there are things that they can do, but they have to be concrete. It can't be, we're going to organize a committee to talk about these changes. They have to be specific, concrete changes, and we have proposed some. Other people are proposing ideas that we support, and I think whoever wins has that opportunity to still earn the vote, but the reality is that they haven't earned it yet.
Thank you. Doesn't that imply, though, that how some of you might vote tomorrow could change come October 29th, watching for those potential changes?
It does imply that, absolutely, but they have to be concrete, specific changes that are made before the vote, not promises of changes in the future.
The vote for House Speaker is a constitutional position. It's not a party position. And the vote that matters is on October 29. Yep. So we're going to look at how this place is run. We're going to talk to all the candidates. And we're going to make sure that before that vote takes place, we know how each candidate will handle it and what changes have been made.
One thing I thought I heard last night was consistent across the candidates was a commitment to a majority of the majority, and which is, by my count, has been violated 10 times on major pieces of legislation in the last 4 years and 9 months, just last week again. Between then and now, though, there could be major votes on a debt ceiling, on a transportation bill, on plenty of other things. And the CR vote just weighs heavily on my mind. Everybody in leadership voted for that, and then talked about, well, maybe we need to change our approach on that. But those things will play in my mind is what happens on these issues, how are those handled by candidates, and how they are voting on opportunities for Republicans to lead versus opportunities many are looking forward to work with the former speaker, which just occurred last week when an overwhelming majority of the House Republican Conference said no, and our whole leadership team said we're going to vote with Pelosi on that one.
If I could just underscore that's a great point. In between tomorrow and the 29th, potentially the omnibus spending bill, which may include breaking the spending caps. There's been talk of that. There could be an XM bill on the floor. There could be a transportation bill on the floor. And, as Tim mentioned, possibly a debt ceiling. So those things will weigh in as well as to what might happen on the 29th.
Other questions related to speakership? Well, if you want to wait for the mic, come right up. Come over.
Alex Sawyer with Breitbart News. This is just to the panel. Is the fact that Jason Chaffetz is the one who removed Mark Meadows from his subcommittee chairmanship come up in any of y'all's discussion about considering him as speaker, or do you think that's water under the bridge now?
I mean, it certainly came up in the discussion yesterday, but I think individual members will make up their mind about it. I think the thing we're missing in all this is the fact that Jason Chaffetz entered the race. The significance of what happened over the weekend can't be minimized. We left the town last week, and there were 3 elections going to be held tomorrow. And now all of a sudden, there's only 1 election held tomorrow, a rules discussion this afternoon, and 3 weeks until the two other positions are filled. You can fill in the blanks there, but I think that's an indication that I think leadership gets that the marginalizing of conservatives that has taken place over the last 9 months is just not going to be tolerated anymore. And take moves, whether it's through empowerment of various groups within the conference, or whether it's concrete rule changes that have to be, they know that something has to be done for this to work out in the end. And Jason, God bless him for getting in the race. I think with Jason in the race and with Mr. Webster from Florida in the race, I think when the vote total is announced tomorrow, I don't think it's 218. For the person who gets nominated by the conference.
Yes, sir.
I'm Paul Singer with USA Today. You guys are talking about leadership transformation in a degree that it becomes followership. You're asking for a speaker who doesn't set the agenda and drive the conversation. You're asking for a speaker who lets you guys do it and then follows your lead. Doesn't strike me that's what leadership is designed to do around here.
That's what principle-based leadership is designed to do, is empower the members of the conference to do their job. And I hope when you say what we want to do, you don't mean just us here. We realize that sometimes the majority of the conference will be different than us on some issues. But it's actually letting the committees do their work, letting the conference work together, letting the floor do its work. Sometimes that means that our positions will win. Sometimes that means that they won't. But the problem that we have right now is that we're not even being given the opportunity to make our argument. And I'll give you specific examples. Many times we go to rules. Many of us have gone to rules and have asked for a change in the bill. And they say no because it will pass. Think about that. It's not no because it's a bad idea or no because nobody in the conference wants it. It's no because it will pass. Well, what does that mean? It's that they already pre-baked the cake. They already have a deal put together with the Democrats and the Senate, and they don't want us to tinker with that. That's not how legislation works. You let our amendments on the floor, they will pass or they will fail based on their merits, and then you have to work. But you know what that means? That means a lot more work. That may mean that we have to be here 5 days a week instead of 4 days a week. That may mean that we only have 2 weeks of recess instead of 7 weeks of recess. But nobody wants to do that. That we are willing to be here, even if it means weekends. It means more work, it means harder jobs, but that's what the American people elected us to do. That's what they pay us a lot of money to do. And I think it's about time that we start doing our job.
The false, lazy narrative is that we want a more conservative speaker, and that's all there is to it. But the reality is, what we want is a process-focused speaker. And that is better for conservatives, it's better for others in the conference, and it's better for the whole House. The role of speaker is a process position. And what we need is a speaker who follows the House rules. If the rules are followed, sometimes we'll get our way, sometimes others will get their way, and that's okay. I think people get too uptight in this place about whether everyone voted with them on something. I cast my vote on behalf of my district, constrained by the Constitution, and these individuals cast their votes, and others in the House cast their votes. And we're supposed to cast our votes based on the Constitution and our constituency. And we shouldn't have the House leadership, particularly the Speaker, dictating the outcomes before we have a full debate in the House.
Yeah, if I could weigh in on that. Remember that the executive branch is designed to be command and control from the top down. But if you really believe, as our founding fathers did, government by the people, then that means that our job is to represent our districts and to take our districts' values and their agenda and their priorities to Washington. Well, how do you do that if the speaker is dictating the agenda constantly? So I think to address this, we say that's really what regular order is about, and empowering individual members, empowering their districts, and empowering the people that elect us, that send us here in the first place.
These are very powerful statements and understanding what I think is proper representation. And I've had conversations with the speaker about this topic and challenge him. I've got 700,000 Kansans. They're no less important than 700,000 folks from Ohio. But you know who is really dictating the agenda in the U.S. House for the last 4 years and 9 months? That's the President of the United States. How many times have leadership stood up in conferences, we can't do that because the president will shut the government down. He's going to veto it. Harry Reid doesn't like it. It's not what Republicans want, or most important, what our constituents would like to see us pass. It's, well, you know what, we can't do that because the president doesn't like it. That's because our leadership has failed. They have failed to send out all 12 appropriations bills. They could have done that. That's not Harry Reid's fault, Mitch McConnell's fault, Barack Obama's fault. It's our leadership who refuses to allow us to do our constitutional duty. So let the process work. I'm confident at the end of the day, as Raul said, we'll win those battles on the floor. But then we'll have to go through a process. But everybody needs a chance to be heard. You'll see that not just from conservatives. I heard that this morning from folks that were pushing hard for the XM Bank.
Yep, great point.
Give us a shot to process. Well, it's okay for them to get a shot when they have a straight line to the Speaker's office. That's what Daniel Webster's background is so appealing, is he's done that. But what it means to this town, I think it scares the holy heck out of him. You mean I've spent a lot of money to get the Speaker in office, or this person, and all of a sudden it's going to be dependent on what the people out there think? Absolutely. I think that's what our founders intended, and what decades of mismanagement by both parties has led to this current situation, that all-encompassing Speaker gets to control everything, plus we have a Constitution that's flaunted, and they get to run everything in our daily lives as well.
We'll go right here, and then we'll come over to the middle. Wait, sir, would you wait for the microphone? We'll go to her first, and then we'll come to you. Go
Sorry,
ahead.
hi. Mr. Amash, given the framework that you just laid out for effective leadership, and I would pose this to your colleagues too, do you think that Paul Ryan would fit that framework? Have you appealed to him and your colleagues asked him to run?
Paul Ryan is not running, and I don't think anyone has asked him to run. I'll speak for myself. I haven't heard of anyone asking him to run, and I haven't asked him to run. He's never expressed any interest in running.
Just again, please state your name and affiliation.
Eric Wasson from Bloomberg. Just wanted you guys to just directly confront head on. There is a narrative out there that this group wants the next speaker to really confront the administration, cause a shutdown crisis or a debt ceiling crisis over Planned Parenthood. To what extent is that correct? To what extent is that completely false?
Thank you for the question. We took a position, I think it was 24 of us who signed a letter. That was just a position that we took. If we would have gone to conference 7 weeks ago and said, look, we have a CR coming up. Some people want to defund Planned Parenthood. Maybe there were other ideas out there that were better than our idea. We've offered our idea of what we should do about the horrific acts that we saw on those videos. No one else brought up a position, another alternative position. What we want to do is go to the conference and come out of there, maybe after 2 hours of debate, 3 hours of debate, come up with a unified position on how we confront what we saw on the Planned Parenthood video, how we confront the debt ceiling, how we confront future spending bills. That's all we're asking for. Yes, we will have some positions that some of you will call extreme, but that's our position, but we are willing to work with the entire conference to come to a unified position. But what we get from our leadership is the opposite. They say, no, we can't do that, and we can't shut down the government, so we're never going to ask for anything, so we're never going to exercise our power of the purse. Well, what we have done is we have emasculated ourselves because we have pretty much conceded that we don't have the power of the purse. And that's all we're asking for.
Power of the purse is the ultimate power we have, and we can't forfeit before the game starts. So imagine this scenario, just like Raul said, if on July 14th, when the first video comes out, if from that day forward, we'd have taken the narrative, elevated the debate, and said, here's what we're going to stop. We're going to fund the government at the levels the president wanted. We're just simply going to take the money from the organization that did the things we saw, the bad things we saw, and give it to other. That's a pretty common sense position. Make that argument, make that case. That's what our constituents expect, and frankly, that's what we told them we would do. That's how this game works, and so that's what we got to do more of.
Genevieve, to that point, I couldn't agree with Mr. Jordan more. We did that with the DHS bill, and it went over the Senate, and it didn't get a vote, and that wasn't the focus of the discussion. And we did the same thing with Planned Parenthood. We defunded Planned Parenthood. It didn't get a vote in the Senate. We need to raise that profile so we know what we're fighting.
Those are one of the reasons we're trying to change process. We had the unbelievable case of a Speaker of the U.S. House, again, I believe probably the second most powerful man in Washington, if he wants to use that power, stand up and say, I have voted 25 years to defund Planned Parenthood. And you've failed every year. Shouldn't you try a different strategy? I've only been up here 5 years, and not once have I been allowed to even vote on the HHS appropriations bill, because we would have defunded it in there if given a chance, if it was brought to the floor. But John Boehner wouldn't bring it to the floor. And so we agree on what we want to do, but what we're saying here is that's failed. That's failed. So we have one single entity. This is a private organization, and you have the President of the United States issuing a veto threat to shut down the whole federal government, at least 18% of it, by the way, if you don't give money to Planned Parenthood. That's a veto threat from the President. And we are held hostage. The Congress of the United States says, okie doke, whatever you want, Mr. President. Issue after issue. There are other ways to approach it. Daniel Webster had some ideas. Ms. Chaffetz, I mean, it's actually doing our job of doing our work. And yes, it will take a little more time. And the Probes Committee will probably have to work through past July. And that's when they quit. And what difference does it make? It all is going to go in Omni anyway, and the Democrats always win. We need a new approach.
Thank you. Will Dobbs from Morning Consult. I just wanted to circle back to something Congressman Jordan and Hulskamp said about watching for the speaker candidate not just do process reforms, but also how they handle the legislative issues that might come up this October. Specifically, I guess this applies mostly to Kevin McCarthy. Is just like a no vote on issues that you care about enough, or would you expect him to use his pull and influence as the majority leader to, you know, follow through on what you would like to see on you know, the whole slew of the potential legislative items up this next few weeks?
Take the debt limit, for example. We need to do exactly what Raul talked about. Come together as a conference, say, okay, if we're going to increase the borrowing authority of the country, then we need to do something that actually addresses the big problem, the $19 trillion debt. We need to find something that makes sense to put us on a path towards actually getting to balance, and then go out as a group and say, here we are, Mr. President, we'll allow the borrowing authority to go up if you do this. That's how it works. So right now, we're coming up to a deadline, and we've yet to talk about it. So that's what has to happen, and that's what we've all been talking about, the process reform on how we can unify around a position our constituents expect us to unify around and go forward from there.
There's a difference between, imagine a leader who for 7 weeks is articulating the position of the conference, going out there and leading the charge on whatever change we want to make, and then comes to us after 7 weeks and says, you know what, we did it, we tried, and the American people are not with us. Versus a leader who starts 7 weeks before saying, you know, we can't shut down the government, we can't do this, we can't do this other thing. And just every word out of their mouth is that they're not willing to fight. I'd rather have the first leader, the one, even if we fail, that will lead us and will get us to a position where we can be unified. And we can be unified on many of these things. We have been unified many, many times. We have had many votes where we're at 247 because we have had a vision and a strategy. But what happens is as soon as we pass those bills, then we have the Speaker of the House says, well, I guess this is not going to be the final solution. We're going to let the Senate work their will. But that just doesn't work. The House Speaker needs to stand for the House and let the Senate know that they can work their will, and we will go to conference and come to whatever that compromise is in the end.
I want to amend what they're saying a little bit, if they'll let me. The Speaker's role is to focus on process and ensure that the House operates properly and represents the will of the people. The Majority Leader's role is to be the party leader and to rally the troops and try to unify the conference. It's important that we understand the distinction between those roles. One of the biggest problems we've had with Speaker Boehner is that he tries to play both roles, and by playing both roles, he's failed at both roles. So we need to have a Speaker who focuses on process and a Majority Leader who focuses on the party.
All right, we'll go to the second row here, and then we'll come to the front.
Thanks. I'm Christina Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. Sticking on the debt ceiling for a minute, if you guys were to make a request to ask for spending reductions and Obama said, I'm not going to negotiate on the debt ceiling, what would you want your next speaker to do? Would a default be an option that you would want to see as a tactic?
Well, we want to, take a position that makes sense, that addresses the problem, that the American people say, you know what, that's exactly what needs to happen. Take that position and then just stand firm in that position and say, Mr. President, we're an equal branch of government. Here's what we believe makes sense for the folks we represented, the folks who elected us. Here's what we think makes sense to deal with a difficult situation we are in with this huge debt and also the need to increase the borrowing authority. Here's our plan to do it. And then have the debate. To what Raul said before, if we forfeit before we even get into that debate, that's the problem. So we need to have that debate. We think we can win if we've done our job the right way and we've unified our conference in the right way. We think we can win those things. And we've done these before. We had a bill 4 years ago that passed the House, had some Democrats support it. The American people liked it. Passed the House, and as soon as it passed the House, we said, oh, we got to do something else. And like, no. Let's make the case to the American people. That's what has to happen.
Question in my mind is the question back that I would like the administration asks, is this president willing to threaten a default? I mean, he's clearly willing to threaten a shutdown. It's my understanding the last 55 times the debt ceiling has been raised, 28 of those times there's been something significant attached to it dealing with the spending problem. That's a reasonable request, but you can't have leadership running around screaming default and attacking conservatives. Heck, I'd suggest they use their super PAC money right now to start setting the stage that we can win this debate. But that's not happening. But we can win this debate. I think it's reasonable to say we're spending too much money is the problem. And we can win that debate unless the debate is about attacking conservatives and not engaging. But again, it's a month away, and we have yet to hear about it. You don't think the president's aware that we're doing nothing over here other than preparing to capitulate? So I think we can still do something today, and I expect anybody running for leadership should, instead of sitting and spending all their time campaigning, let's show up and lead by some action and example. This is an opportunity. We should not miss this opportunity between now and November 5th.
Because remember, your question implies that the President of the United States is willing to default the nation just so he can borrow more money. This is the same President of the United States who voted against the debt ceiling every time he voted in as a senator. So don't forget that. And because he said it was irresponsible for us to increase the borrowing authority of the United States. I understand that he's got a job, but if he's willing to default on the debt, that's his action. Now, we have to come up with a reasonable plan to address our debt. We may need to look at entitlement spending. There's a lot of different ideas out there that we can all agree on. Some of them are bipartisan ideas that we can actually get some Democrats to work with us. But I agree with the president on one thing. When he was a senator, he said that it was completely irresponsible to borrow without making changes. And I take him at his word then. And I think that it is completely irresponsible for us to do that right now. There are things that we can do. Maybe my idea is too extreme, but I think we can all come together as a conference and come up with an idea that is reasonable, rational, and we can sell to the American people. But we've never once tried to do that.
We should be clear that a default is not going to happen because there are more than enough tax receipts to pay the interest. So a default is not going to happen. The question is, when you raise the debt ceiling, what kind of compromises are going to be made in exchange for raising the debt ceiling? And we haven't seen much from this administration or from leadership, frankly, over the years. If the debt ceiling is going to be suspended or raised, then we need to have concrete reforms to government, not reforms 10 years down the road or 20 years down the road, as we've seen in the past, but actual reforms, not accounting gimmicks, but real reforms that we can see translate into savings for the American people.
Thank you. Erica Warner with AP. Mr. Jordan, you mentioned that the goal for the Freedom Caucus is to vote as a group. I'm wondering if it's in the realm of possibility that you would back McCarthy, or given that some of the outside conservatives and some of your individual members have made clear that he's not an acceptable option, is the idea to find a different candidate that you will unite behind?
Say what I said before. We have every intention of voting together as a group tomorrow and on the House floor. we're looking at all the candidates, but our focus is voting as a block.
If I could answer that, I'm actually not a member of the House Freedom Caucus, but McCarthy's absolutely. That's right. I play one on this dais. McCarthy's absolutely not an option. You can't go back home and tell your town halls, well, your tens of thousands of phone calls really made a difference. John Boehner stepped down and we replaced him with his right-hand man. That is not going to work. It will empower Trump. Look, we're dysfunctional here as a Congress, but we're also dysfunctional as a party. And there's absolutely no way that I think that you can vote for McCarthy and go back home and tell your constituents you did the best thing for them. I feel like his comments on Benghazi may have disqualified him not as Speaker, but also as Majority Leader.
Christina Marcos with The Hill. Last year, in the wake of Eric Cantor's departure, Congressman Labrador, you ran for Majority Leader. But why is it this time that none of the leading members of the Freedom Caucus are running for any leadership positions? I mean, wouldn't that be the best way to ensure that you have a candidate who offers the process-driven way of leadership you're looking for, or even to have a candidate that you could say to McCarthy, we'll elect you as Speaker, but here's someone who could also be in the leadership to have a coalition government?
That's a great question. And sometimes you have to make a decision when you're leading the revolution. You also, upset a lot of people. And it's very difficult to make change as we have been trying to make and also build a coalition. Even the people that agree with us, that are upset with us, agree with the changes that need to be made. They just wish we would have done it a little bit less loud or a little bit differently. But if we would have done those things, we would still be talking about not making any changes today. So sometimes when you act like we have, and I think we were forced to act this way because we have asked for these changes in a nice way before, and now we decided to form the Freedom Caucus and do it a little bit differently, I think it's going to be difficult to win a leadership position. But knowing that we can work together and stick together, as Jim has said several times, we can actually effectuate change by making sure that those things happen when, before we have a vote on the floor. And I think that's really our strength right now, is working together as a group. And I don't know that, I'll be honest, I don't know that one of our leading members could be elected right now. But if we make those changes, and we see that those changes are actually best for the body and best for everybody as a whole, I think in the future there might be some people in this group who could then run for leadership.
Okay, we're going to get two questions on this side, and then I'm going to move over here. Second row, and then we'll come to the front.
Hi, Francine Kiefer from the Christian Science Monitor. So a completely open process, as you're asking for, would necessarily mean a completely open process to Democrats. So could you please address that?
Well,
Are you
Go ahead, Andy.
talking
Just quickly,
legislatively?
Quickly, what we're talking about is not necessarily an open process, but the process that's already been defined, where legislation is moved through committees. And the last time I checked, we have a Republican chair of every committee. And so they have the jurisdiction over that. So it is true that an open process would allow Democrats to have votes, and they probably make us take some very difficult votes on amendments to bills that come to the floor. But I think ultimately it's going to work in our favor to empower the institution. It's a scary proposition, really, to let the institution work. But what will happen is whatever comes out of here will be the will of the people.
It's the way it worked at, many of us served in the state legislature. It's the way it worked in the state legislature. I remember three of my favorite words to say is move to amend. When you had a bill on the floor, because they had to deal with you. You show up with an amendment, they had to deal with you. And Justin made a point earlier that I think was right on target. You all know the position this group's taken on the Ex-Im Bank. We think it's corporate welfare. We think it's the worst. Big corporations cozying up to big government, getting special deals at the expense of middle-class taxpayers. We don't like it. We don't want it to be reauthorized. It hasn't been reauthorized. We don't want it to be resurrected, right? We like it dead. But right now there's a discharge petition working its way in the House. And you know what? I don't like it, but that's the rules. And if people want to use that as a way to get their their bill done, they have that right. As Justin said and as Thomas said, that process does empower the members, and that's what this that's how this place is supposed to work.
And I think Thomas says something very important. You're empowering the committees. In the committees, so we have a majority in the House, a majority in the committees. You're still going to have Republican legislation. But one of my favorite things, he used to love amending things on the floor. I used to love working with Democrats in my committee in the legislature, where I would see I used to call, and I've used this term many times, is the two wings of the party work together. Of each party work together to get legislation forward or to kill legislation. You can work with Democrats in committee. You can say, you know what, I like this bill that's coming from the chairman, but I can work with 8 Democrats to amend it to something that maybe is more akin to what the people in my district want. But that is only allowed if you open the process. Right now, even in committee, if you vote against the chairman, you're punished. There are people here who were kicked off their committees because they didn't vote with the chairman. That should never happen. The committees, you have an individual vote. You should be able to work with anybody in the committee, anybody on the floor, and that's how the process works. So yes, that will mean probably that the Democrats will have more opportunities to work. They won't always win, but every once in a while they might come to one of us and say, hey, I have this idea in committee, will you work with me? And we'll be like, sure, that sounds like a terrific idea. And then if you're more open to do that, I think you get better results.
We have House rules to find the will of the House. The advantage Republicans have is that we have more members, we have chairmen, and we have more members on the committees. And we're supposed to let the process work. And sometimes Republicans and Democrats are going to join together and they're going to pass things. And sometimes Republicans are going to control the process because they have more members and Republicans all go one way on a particular item. And sometimes it'll be different. But we have to let the process work itself out. And if that process works itself out, you'll have a better Congress that better represents the people, and you'll have more conservative legislation that comes to the floor and gets passed, and sometimes you may have more liberal legislation that comes to the floor and gets passed. But the process will be better for everyone, and it'll be better for the American people.
Let me give you an example of how following the rules will benefit Republicans when we're in the majority. So Daniel Webster and a lot of us have lamented that we're spending money for programs that are no longer authorized. The authorizations have run out. And this is really actually criminal that we're doing this. And what he said is give you a 3-year grace period. Start with important bills like the transportation bill. These things have to be reauthorized in the committees. And what this does, if you say we're not going to fund anything after 3 years that's not been authorized, it requires you to get to 60 votes in the Senate to authorize any of these programs. The math changes. Now that works to our advantage. And then there has to be, to get that bill across the floor with 2 Republican majorities, to get 2 concurrent majorities in the House and the Senate to approve something, you can be darn sure there's going to be some reforms on those authorizations, or they're not going to pass either chamber, much less both of them. So that's how following the rules works to our advantage when we're in the majority.
All right, let's try to get 3 more quick questions and we'll start right here.
Hi, I'm Deborah Berry with Connects Washington Bureau. Representative Jordan, you mentioned that the Freedom Caucus will vote as a block tomorrow for Speaker. Is that the same approach you're going to take with the majority leader? And are you leaning, is the caucus leaning one way or another?
Our intention is, as I've said a couple times now, our intention is to vote together tomorrow and on the floor. The majority leader's race is later on, and that's not a floor vote, so we haven't discussed that. We focused on the Speaker vote.
Matt Fuller with Roll Call. We've seen this effort to block a speaker before, and it's failed a number of times because it seems there wasn't an alternative and there wasn't a clear plan. What assurances can you give members who might be sympathetic to that idea of voting against McCarthy on the floor that there is a plan, that they will end up with a better alternative than Kevin McCarthy?
I'm sorry, can you repeat? That's my bad.
Well, we've seen that this. Hey, all right, maybe it wasn't. So we've seen this effort to block a speaker now a couple times, and it hasn't worked because there hasn't been an alternative, there hasn't been a clear plan. What assurances can you give members who might be sympathetic to voting against McCarthy, who might be open to that idea, that there is a clear plan here, that something better than McCarthy will end up from that process?
There are, look, we're still talking, and this thing is fluid. I think Congressman Harris made a good point earlier. 5 days ago, there were 2 people in the race. Today, there are 3. Last Friday, or excuse me, Sunday morning is when Congressman Chaffetz announced this thing is fluid. You don't know what's going to happen. What we do know is that we're still discussing this race, and if we vote as a group, we have more ability to influence the decision than if we don't.
One thing as well that's become clear that there has been plenty of punishment meted out, and it's not working very well. I think our constituents are beginning to understand that, and they're becoming even more frustrated with us. And I haven't seen the actual poll results. I just heard them told to me verbally over the weekend poll that was out in the field, reported that only 22% of the American people wanted to keep John Boehner as Speaker. Only 23% wanted to keep Mitch McConnell. Here's the change. People get it. They get it that Republicans promised in 2010, 2012, and 2014 we'd do something, and you can't get them to name one thing we've been successful on. There might be some minor things. That, to me, is the environment's different. And maybe it's not the environment in here of insider baseball for Speaker elections, but on the outside, it's palpable. They're frustrated. They're upset. They're supporting 3 candidates, 50+% in the Republican primary. That's just a finger to Washington. And that's what's different. And so folks that go in and say, I'm going to vote for John Boehner 2.0, however it looks, they're going to face problems at home if my phone lines are any indication of what we're seeing all across this country.
Look, here's one thing that's different. There's no incumbent here that's all-powerful and threatens to be a sore winner like Speaker Boehner was. He won and kicked 2 guys off their committees within 3 hours of winning. The prospect of that happening here is very slim. The first thing whoever wins is going to have to do is to bring the conference back together. So I think the threat of that is much less. People are more free to vote for who they believe in, and hopefully we'll see that play out.
And to clarify, he kicked me off my committee before he won.
No, he was talking about other two.
I know, in the past, though. So there are multiple candidates. The vote that matters is the vote on the House floor. That's the constitutional vote. And we're supposed to go through the process. And if there is a stalemate, there's a stalemate. And then we go through the normal process. We have more votes. And I wouldn't be surprised to see other candidates at that point jump in when they see that there's an opportunity for an alternative.
Yeah, it could be Jason, it could be Daniel. Maybe we go to the floor and there's no consent, you can't get to 218. It could be any other member who comes up as somebody who can get the 218, somebody who can bring the party together. It could even be Kevin McCarthy. If he, like I said, he has 3 weeks to make systemic changes, to not just talk about the changes, but to show exactly what he's going to do. It could be any of these options, and that's the beauty of the situation we're in, that we have an opportunity to completely change what's happening, and I think to unify the conference, because we want to spend our time talking about what the other side is doing instead of continuing to talk about what we're doing internally.
Final question.
Sahil Kapoor with Bloomberg. This is broader than the speaker's race, but I'm curious, who in your party's presidential field best represents House conservatives in the Freedom Caucus, and who least represents you?
You want 10 different answers?
The correct
I'd love 10 different answers.
The correct answer is
I believe Mr. Massey
Huckabee.
brought up Trump, but if you could elaborate.
The correct answer is Huckabee.
So you got one Huckabee. I think we got several Pauls.
Paul.
Rand Paul. We have some who haven't made a decision. I don't know if any. Yeah. So, for me, it's an exciting race. I actually like many of the candidates. I'm friends with many of them. Paul probably is closest to me in philosophy of any of the candidates, but I would be happy with just about any candidate except for a couple that are in the race.
All right. Thank you all very much. Thank you, and look out for the date for November.